Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on the AI Act and its practical implications, what it means for your business. We have a nice collaborative effort going on today together with colleagues from Sorainen, friends from Sparkle Consulting and Fibricheck. We have a good mix of presenters. One is a data science manager. We'll be covering more from the practical aspects of using AI. Then we have a data lawyer speaking about certain legal implications. And we also have a data consultant focusing more on the tech side. So I'm very excited about today's webinar. A couple of formal kind of announcements. You will have the opportunity to send your questions through the Q&A function. We will try to cover those either at the end of each presentation or later in the discussion and Q&A section. So please do use it actively. More questions, more interesting content at the end. We will also, we have received some questions in advance. We will try to cover those during the presentations or also touch upon these in the Q&A session. But I do encourage you to send your questions in sooner rather than later, so we will have more time to take your questions into account. Now, all the presentations will be shared later on, along with the recording, to all those who have registered. So feel free to enjoy the webinar. You will get the materials later. But now, without further ado, let me present the first speaker. This is Glenn De Witte from Fibricheck, and we'll be speaking about Fibricheck and the AI Act, and the topic is keeping your finger on the pulse of innovation. Glenn, word to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mihkel, for the nice introduction. Yeah, so I'll first start with introducing myself. So my name is Glenn. I've been working for almost 5 years at Fibricheck right now. I studied mathematical engineering, and Fibricheck is a company of around 25 people. And there are currently 3 people in the data science team, of which I'm a part of. So I'll first start a little bit explaining what exactly is Fibricheck. So you cannot really understand Fibricheck without understanding what atrial fibrillation is. So atrial fibrillation is a cardiovascular disease with a lifetime risk in 1 out of 3 for people of the age of 50 plus. So that means when you have when you are 50 years of age, that the probability that you will have atrial fibrillation in your lifetime is 1 out of 3. It's a disease that is responsible for 20% of all strokes, and 40% remains undiagnosed because there are 2 main reasons for that. One is that the disease is not always present, so it's possible that it's only present at certain moments. And another one is that it's also not always symptomatic, so you can have it without having symptoms, basically. And also the coming years, the prevalence of the disease is expected to go up. So yeah, it's important to tackle this disease, let's say, and to detect it as early as possible. So yeah, how do you detect atrial fibrillation, or how do you know that you have atrial fibrillation? So one method is to just measure your heart rate or heart rhythm via your pulse, but that's very inaccurate, of course. One of the most accurate methods is actually to have an electrocardiogram, a 12-lead electrocardiogram. That's often taken in the hospital because you need specialized hardware to take an electrocardiogram. It's also possible to take a Holter. That's basically a portable electrocardiogram that is placed on your body, and usually that takes around 24 hours, but it's quite uncomfortable with all the electrodes. And then you can also have a patch that's more comfortable, that can you can measure your heart rhythm with that for 1 week. And then there's also a very invasive solution. So that's the implementable loop recorder. So then they really plant a device in your body to monitor you for up to 3 years, basically. Limitations of these traditional technologies are that it's often limited to location. So you often need to go to the doctor or to the hospital to get an electrocardiogram. It's often very limited in time. It's lacking user friendliness, and it's also quite expensive because you need specialized hardware to take the electrocardiogram, for example. So basically that's where Fibricheck comes in. So we fill that gap, or we aim to fill that gap. And we aim to fill that gap by really trying or aiming to have a software solution. So it's a software solution only, and it aims to be available on hardware that you already have. So our most popular product is a mobile phone, but we also work together with some wearable devices, smartwatch providers. And it's a software solution that is capable to detect atrial fibrillation and in the meantime also other heart rhythm diseases. And it uses optical technology to do that. So it's based on light, but I'll go into that a little bit deeper later. So how does it work in practice? You can take measurements of 1 minute long with the Fibricheck application. And in the case of a smartphone, it goes as follows. You place your finger on the camera of the smartphone, the flash turns on, you wait 60 seconds. So that's when you're really measuring or taking a measurement. And after the measurement, you get a result of your measurement indicating that you have a heart rhythm disorder like atrial fibrillation, or that everything is normal and regular. And you can also annotate the symptoms that you had during the measurement. How does this work exactly then? So which technology is used? I'll go a little bit deeper into that because it's also relevant. So it's basically PPG technology, which is photoplethysmography. It's a mouthful, but it's basically, it uses optical signals to measure how much blood is in your finger at a certain moment. So when you place your finger on the camera and the flash is on, if there is a lot of blood in your finger, the capillaries are extended, as you can see here on the right, and a lot of light is reflected back to the camera. If there is not a lot of blood in your finger, not a lot of light is reflected back. And by measuring over time, you can really get a very accurate picture of your heart rhythm and also your blood pressure, basically. So after your measurement is taken, so after you put your finger for 1 minute on the camera, then the artificial intelligence comes into play. So we have a machine learning model in the cloud. Your measurement is sent to the cloud and it gets processed there by the machine learning algorithm, and it reports back to you if you have a certain heart rhythm disorder. It reports back the heart rate. It reports back certain heart rate variability metrics, and you can see, you can see if you're healthy or not on the in your heart. So how is this model trained? That happens. I think it's very important to note that there are two separate data sets, or in the bigger picture, two separate data sets. So one is really a data set on which you train the model, on which you train the model, and another set is actually a test set, a clinical validation set, which you cannot look at during the training, and that is used to evaluate your results after the training. And so it's important here because in the training set you can use basically whatever data you want. You can use artificially generated data. You can use data from clinical trials, or you can actually augment it with a lot of things. But on the test set, that needs to be clinically validated data, And it's also important on the regulatory aspect, because a lot of regulatory instances really look at the test set to evaluate your model and see, is this medical device fit to be in the market, or does it not adhere to the requirements, and can it not be on the market? So I'll give some small examples on how human interpretation happens. So the model gives a classification, but it's also the aim that it can be interpreted by a medical technician, or even you yourself, if you have a guide on how to interpret these measurements. And so in this example, the left is the PPG output, so that's really the optical signal. And here at the bottom, you see basically the more, so this is a tachogram, maybe I'll start with that. So at the bottom on the left side, you can see a tachogram, and on the right, you can see a Poincaré plot. And those are two figures which help human interpretation of the PPG signal. And basically, the more flat or the more smooth the line at the bottom is, the more regular your heart rhythm. And as you can see on the left, you see quite a bit of chaos here. It's not a smooth line, and that's an indication that you have atrial fibrillation. And also on the Poincaré, you can see that it's a hailstone pattern. It's not a smooth dot in case of the regular rhythm. And those interpretation aids should be familiar for those who read electrocardiograms, because there they also use it to aid human interpretation, basically. Here's another example of a measurement with a regular rhythm. So you see here the line is a lot smoother on the left, and this indicates that the rhythm is regular. And also on the right with the electrocardiogram, so that's the same measurement, by the way, taken at the same time. It indicates very smooth and that the rhythm is regular. So we really started with atrial fibrillation, but in the meantime, the machine learning model is actually capable of classifying 13 different cardiovascular diseases, and they all have a very distinct pattern on the tachogram and the Poincaré plot, so that also helps with interpretation. So basically, in a nutshell, the Fibricheck application is made to be as simple as possible for the patient, but under the hood, we use artificial intelligence and machine learning to get the best results possible for our patients. So how does innovation and compliance come into play? Quickly gonna take a step back and look. So as I said already, we are software only, so we are compatible with different kinds of hardware, but we are a software only medical device, basically. And you have different types of applications on the market. The first one we call CREPs. It's basically applications that they tell they can do something, but there is no scientific evidence for that. For example, there was an acne app that said that it could cure acne by sending light with specific wavelengths from the phone, but there is really no scientific evidence for that, and they also don't adhere to any regulations. There are fitness and wellness apps, which are more like tracking your day-to-day agenda, tracking your training schedules, and your evolution, but it's not really a medical app. There's medicalized wellness, for example. A nice example is actually Pokemon Go, where it was proven that if you use the Pokemon Go app, that you were in better fitness on average than if you did not use it before. And then you also have the medical apps like Skin Vision and Fibricheck, for example, which really have a medical goal and also need to adhere to a lot of regulations. And so I think the takeaway from this slide is that if you identify yourself as a medical app and your intended use is really medical, then you need to adhere to a lot of regulations, while for the 3 other types of apps, you don't need to adhere to those regulations, to any of those regulations. And so if you are a medical app, depending on where you want to sell and market your app, there's also regional compliance and regulatory rules where you need to adhere to. So in Europe, it's the CE mark or the CE label. In the United States, it's FDA. It's also quite common. And then there are a lot of smaller organizations on a lot of smaller regional levels. For example, UK, Australia, they also have their own. So I'm gonna zoom a little bit in on the European regulation. So that's today the medical device regulation. It's also a risk-based approach, basically. So your software, or in the case of Fibricheck, you fall in one of the 5 classes. And based on the risk that is, that your app or software or your medical device represents, you belong to one of those classes. For example, class 3, it's really more the invasive classes. It's like the pacemakers, the heart valves, things that you need, that are often invasive in your body. And we are class 2A, so we are not invasive, which is moderate risk for a medical device, but you really need notified body approval that is required. And also in the medical device regulations, we are actually in a transition. So the medical device regulations are actually a successor of the MDD, the Medical Device Directive from before. And also the trend there is that the regulations only get stricter and stricter. So, for example, in the Medical Device Directive, there were 60 pages in total to write it down. In the medical device regulations, it's 173 pages already. And basically on a lot of things, it has become a little bit more strict. This slide is a little bit about the challenge of our company to adhere to these regulations. I think in my day-to-day job, the biggest challenge is that you often work like on the right in software development. You work with sprints, very incrementable changes, and you increment the improvements are really incremental. So every few weeks you release maybe new software, but often the regulations are written with a waterfall methodology in mind, where you really look at the requirements, the design, the implementation, verification, maintenance of a product, and after X months or year, you release the product. And so that's really a challenge, because for every version of new software that you release after a few sprints, you really need to make sure that all the regulatory boxes are ticked, and you really need to prove everything again, that your app is compliant, basically. So that takes some administrative, some administrative work is involved to make that work. But so like I said, in the team that I work in, it's more the data science team. So the algorithm of the app is really version controlled software. So every few weeks we aim to release a new algorithm version, and we really need to deliver regulatory documentation for every algorithm version. You need to run the clinical validation again on the test set, see how the app performs. You need to go over the software requirements, tick off all the boxes, check all the off-the-shelf software, architectural design, make up the documents, sign them. That's the practical work that is involved, I would say, compliance-wise within our team. And also after the launch, we monitor the metrics of the algorithm. So how is the algorithm doing compared to the previous version? The distribution of outputs from this version, is it comparable to the previous version? If there are differences, we investigate them, of course, or if they are not expected. Sometimes improvements are expected, of course, that's normal. If they are not expected, you investigate them after the launch of the algorithm. And maybe one nice anecdote was also in the middle, 2 releases ago, we expected that quality was going down with a certain release, but instead the amount of bad quality measurements went up. So that means that users see a bad quality result after a measurement, that the signal quality is not good. And we noticed that there just was a cyclic pattern, and that in the winter, the signal quality was often worse because the fingers are less filled with blood in the winter. So that was a nice, let's say, a useless thing we noticed, but quite interesting nonetheless. Okay, so maybe a quick overview of compliance-wise. So compliance-wise on the left, that's really for the whole company. So your whole company needs to adhere to GDPR, HIPAA, and on the right, the current regulatory approvals, that's actually for a product, for a Fibricheck app, the regulatory approvals where we are allowed to be on the market, let's say. The EU Artificial Intelligence Act fit into this. So the Artificial Intelligence Act is also a risk-based approach. And so we will be in the high risk class because we are a medical device. But for medical devices, the feeling in general is that not a lot will change in practice, because if you adhere to all the regulations of the medical device, you will also adhere to the regulations that are in the European Artificial Intelligence Act. And I would say the medical device regulations are a bit more broader, so they don't focus on the artificial intelligence, while the Artificial Intelligence Act is really focusing on that AI part in our product, let's say. But to adhere to the regulations of the medical device, you already need to prove a lot of, or you need to tick a lot of boxes off also in the artificial intelligence portion, let's say. That being said, I think, it's nice that there's being more thoughtful about this, but because I personally think that there are certain dangers to AI, and it's good, or regulation always follows what happens on the market, or not on the market, but in business. And I think it's good that it's that regulations are getting in place to really limit those risks and take those risks into account. Thank you very much for your attention, and very happy to answer some questions.
All right, thank you, Glenn. I think we don't have any added questions from the Q&A right now, but for me it was really interesting to hear how you work in sprints that are happening, if I heard correctly, every couple of weeks. And you mentioned that you also managed to tick all the regulatory boxes within a quite short time frame for each release. Just wondering, how do you do that in practice? So it's I guess those working in IT are kind of used to this agile methodology in development, but all the other let's say stakeholders involved, agile is perhaps not that common yet. So how have you managed to actually administer these changes?
I think in practice it's often also making use of tools that are specialized and really look at that boundary between the agile methodology and regulatory documentation. And so we actually use an own tool that we developed internally, the software lifecycle tool, where you automate as much as possible. So things that are constant are automatically generated for the next version, and only things that change you put into the tool, the things that change, and then the rest is automatically generated. And then so I would say really leverage the tools that are made to make this as easy as possible. But even still, it's still a challenge, and still we still need to improve in that process, because it still takes a lot of time, even though it's automated. So it's still a constant challenge company-wise for our team, and also the more development team, to make that process as efficient as possible, I would say.
Right, and as a final question, perhaps your personal view in terms of regulating AI, is it good or bad for innovation?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I went to a data science meetup on Monday, and one of the presentations was about the European AI Act, and I think the feeling in general in the room was that it's really hard, let's say. And one of the reasons is, for example, not for medical device companies, but one of the presenters said that on average a company would need to spend 330K to really adhere to the new regulations. And I think it's a lot of money, and yeah, it's hard to keep innovating. At the same time, I think it's probably good that companies think more about the risks as well of artificial intelligence, because if you don't pay attention in your training data that it's heterogeneous enough, that for example in our medical device, that all skin tones are not represented enough, or not all age groups are not represented enough, that certain unwanted side effects can happen. And that's a good thing that the regulation covers, that you need to think about those things actively in your development. So it has its downsides, its upsides, and I think time will tell in practice how much of that goal it achieves, I would say.
Right, so thank you, Glenn. We may have a few more questions later on to you in the Q&A session. But now I will give the word to my good colleague Oliver, who is a data lawyer and expert in technology law. And he will be talking about how to navigate the new AI Act from legal point of view, and will tell you about everything you need to know. Oliver, word to you.
Thank you, Mihkel. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks, Glenn, for your presentation. And then good morning from my side, everyone, as well. And as said, I'll briefly introduce what the AI Act will bring about from the legal point of view. As of now, the AI Act is almost finalized, and the current text we can be rather confident that this will also be adopted in the near future. So briefly about the agenda, my focus will mainly be about understanding the scope of the AI Act, the risk-based approach it introduces, and also the prohibited and high-risk AI systems and the high-risk practices. And finally, we'll also look at the enforcement timeline and fines. So there's quite a lot to go through. It will be quite a high-level overview, but hopefully in the end, you'll know the basic steps you need to take in order to prepare for the AI Act. So let's get started. When looking at the definition of AI in the AI Act, you can see that it's quite broad, and it's intentionally quite broad to ensure that it doesn't become outdated in the near future. So the key elements in the definition are autonomy, the ability to exhibit adaptiveness, and perhaps most importantly, the ability to infer from some kind of input data some kind of output that would influence the physical or virtual environments. So this is what makes AI different from predetermined software, for example. And then again, the scope of the definition is quite broad. Those of you who might have been following the developments with the AI Act might recall that when ChatGPT was first unveiled, it didn't actually quite fit into the definition that was proposed in the first commission draft. So this broad definition seeks to avoid these kinds of issues in the future, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all of these systems will be placed under some kind of mandatory obligations. But we'll go into that a bit later. So when we're looking at the territorial scope, the AI Act, it will of course apply to businesses operating in the EU. But similarly to the GDPR, the EU wants to influence also global policy. So the AI Act will also have an extraterritorial effect, meaning it will apply to businesses who are supplying AI systems to the EU, but also businesses whose AI systems output is used in the EU. And when we're looking at the specific operators, it will of course first apply to providers of AI systems, the companies who actually develop AI and place this on the market. But most importantly, perhaps most businesses will find that they're actually deployers of AI. So these are operators who actually use AI systems. A good example, and perhaps a very common example, is imagine you're a company, you're looking to filter job applications with an AI solution. So in this case, your company would be a deployer of AI systems. And collectively, all these operators in the AI value chain are referred to as operators, and the obligations under the AI Act, they will differ depending on what kind of role do you have. So providers will have most of the obligations, but deployers will also have quite a few obligations that they will need to look out for. Now, there are also several exclusions to the AI Act, several circumstances where it will not apply. They're here on the slide, and maybe I'd highlight that similarly to the GDPR, the AI Act will not apply for personal and purely non-professional activities. An important aspect as well, the AI Act will not apply to AI systems that are exclusively used for military, defense, or national security purposes. And the emphasis here is on the word exclusively. So if you have a dual-use system that you use for some other civilian purposes, then that would still be covered under the AI Act. And another important exclusion is that the AI Act will not apply to systems that have been specifically developed and put into service for scientific research and development. And here again, the emphasis is on the sole purpose. So the sole purpose of the system needs to be scientific research and development. So the idea here was to not stifle innovation and then to allow this scientific research to continue. If you think in practical terms, then the companies or the industries that might benefit from this exclusion are, for example, pharmaceutical companies. As has been said, the AI Act doesn't apply to all kinds of systems, but the AI Act, it takes a risk-based approach. So it categorizes AI systems based on the level of risk that they pose, from unacceptable risk to unregulated AI systems. So depending on the risk level, there are different obligations. And as you can see, at the top of the pyramid, we have AI systems which pose an unacceptable risk, and these are prohibited. We later took a closer look at that, what these exactly are. Second, we have high-risk systems. These systems, they're permitted, but they're subject to mandatory requirements and a prior conformity assessment before they're placed on the market. So, for example, in the case of Fibricheck, you have medical devices, but you also have, for example, vehicles and some use cases in law enforcement and education, for example. After high risk, we have limited risk systems. So these are mostly systems that interact with humans, for example, chatbots, and then these are subject to transparency obligations. And lastly, we have systems that are unregulated, that don't really fall within these any of these categories. And then actually it's envisioned that most of the AI systems should fall into this category, or at least into the limited risk category. And for these, there are no for these unregulated AI systems, there are no restrictions, but you're able to adopt these voluntary codes of conduct, which are encouraged. And lastly, there's also an additional category which came quite in the end of the legislative process, and this was this general purpose AI, which includes models from OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic, for example. So now that we know the risk-based approach, let's take a look at what the AI Act prohibits. So crucially, the AI Act bans AI systems that pose unacceptable risks. So out of these, maybe what I would highlight is that perhaps the first 3-4 would be more relevant to businesses, and perhaps the last 4 or 5 are perhaps more relevant to public authorities. These, for example, include dark patterns or manipulative, deceptive techniques, and the EU legislator also provides examples, for example, what this might include, and these might be, for example, machine-brain interfaces, if you think of Neuralink or virtual reality environments, in the case that these systems are deployed in a way that distorts a person's behavior. What perhaps I would also highlight from the risk is that social scoring is prohibited, and notably in the first draft, this prohibition only applied to public services, but now it also applies to businesses. And then maybe an important distinction also is the last prohibition. So systems used in the workplace and educational institutions that identify or infer emotions are also prohibited, since these may lead to discriminatory results, and considering the imbalance of powers in the workplace and also in for example, universities, these are prohibited. So we've had a look at the prohibited categories. Let's move over to high-risk AI. And when we're looking at high-risk AI, in order to understand whether your product or the system you use falls within the definition, you need to understand that the definition has a dual definition of high-risk AI. So first, within the scope, we have AI systems that are used either as safety components in products, or there are products themselves that have been regulated under EU law. So this is the Annex 2 in the AI Act. And again, these, for example, a good example is a medical device, or also vehicles or radio equipment. Now, the second category of high-risk AI systems are standalone AI systems, and these are described in Annex 3. And these, for example, include biometrics-based systems and critical infrastructure components and so on. So the obligations differ a bit depending on the category of high-risk AI. So let's dig a bit deeper. And as said, in the first category, we have this Annex 2 and AI systems that have been already regulated under EU law. So there's 2 criteria for the AI Act to apply. First, as said, the system needs to be used as a safety component, or it itself needs to be a product under EU harmonized legislation. The list you can see on the bottom of the slide. It's a rather lengthy list. And second, under this legislation, the AI Act will apply if the product is also required to undergo a third-party conformity assessment. So in the case of Fibricheck, for example, there was a requirement for a third-party assessment, so the AI Act would also apply in this case. And again, yes, the list is rather long. It ranges from toys to rail systems and motor vehicles and so on. Now, if your product does not fall within the category of Annex 2, you still might not be out of the clear because your product might be considered high risk as a standalone system. There's a list of what these systems might be in the AI Act in the Annex 3, and it includes a wide range of areas of use, from biometrics-based systems, safety components in critical infrastructure, and many use cases in education as well. What I would perhaps highlight, and what's most important, is again use in employment and workers management. So any kind of AI system that is used to filter candidates or analyze applications of candidates, that would be considered high risk. So the high risk obligations would apply. But with this Annex 2, there's an important aspect that you can actually exempt yourself from the high risk obligations if you can provide that there's no significant risk actually arising. The AI system it's simply doing an insignificant part of the overall activity, and this won't actually influence the outcome of the decision. So there's very specific circumstances when this applies. For example, when an AI system is simply performing a narrow task, or when it is reviewing some activity that was previously conducted by a natural person. So, for example, this might be the case when an AI system is used to analyze grading patterns of teachers to detect any inconsistencies. So the actual grading has already been done by a human, but the system is later just reviewing the work. This assessment must be documented, and then the EU Commission will actually provide additional guidelines how to document this assessment. So there's several requirements that are applicable to high-risk AI, but the key here again is this risk-based approach. So taking into account the risk, the intended purpose and context of use, you need to put in place a risk management system that would actually work as an overall framework in ensuring compliance with all these key requirements that you can see on the slide. And there's quite a lot of them. They're rather principle-based. So there's data governance requirements. There's a requirement to keep logs. You also need to, as a provider, for example, you also need to draw up technical documentation. There are transparency obligations. For example, to the extent this is possible, AI systems should be designed in a way that they ensure in a transparent way to interpret the output accordingly. Again, to the extent this is possible, there should be an interface for human oversight. For example, via user interface, the human overseeing the system should be able to understand how the system actually works, and then how to prevent any risks arising from the system. And lastly, there's also the general principles of accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity. For example, there should be redundancy solutions. There should be measures taken against third-party attacks against the system, for example. And then again, these principles or these obligations, they're quite muddy, or they're quite principle-based at this moment. But the key here is this risk-based approach and the risk management system that needs to be implemented in accordance with this, the risk that the system might pose. Now, the requirements that we just saw, these were applicable to AI systems themselves. But when it comes to these specific obligations that operators have, then these differ depending on the role of the operator. So providers of AI systems, they will be primarily responsible in ensuring that their product is fully compliant. So basically, they will need to demonstrate that they have systematically considered the risks arising from their AI, and this again includes establishing this risk management system. But also importantly, before providers place on the market a high-risk system, let's say again a good example is a medical device, they need to conduct this conformity assessment before they place it on the market. And high-risk systems, they also need to be registered in a public EU database. And then if this is reasonably requested by a regulator, then providers will need to demonstrate conformity. So what providers will mostly be looking for in the near future are standards, because if a high-risk AI system is compliant with a harmonized standard in the EU, then it's also presumed, at least, to be in conformity with the requirements for high-risk AI systems. Now, when it comes to deployers, then again, most businesses will likely find that they're not providers, but deployers of AI systems. So meaning that they will likely be using a turnkey AI solution in their everyday business. So most importantly, deployers will need to ensure that these systems are used in accordance with the instructions that come with the system. So they will need to put in place some kind of technical and organizational measures to ensure this. And to the extent this is possible, there should also be sufficient human oversight over the systems. And then thirdly, there's monitoring and record keeping obligations. So at a minimum, for example, deployers will need to record logs for at least 6 months. But again, this is the specific retention timeline depends on the risk of the system. Now, deployers who are providing public services, or also, for example, banks or insurance providers who are assessing creditworthiness, or, for example, assessing risks related to life insurance, health insurance, then they will need to conduct an additional assessment, which is a fundamental rights impact assessment. So they will need to be looking at things like bias and potential discrimination in their systems, and then try to mitigate those kinds of risks. So how to achieve compliance with the AI Act is a 35 million euro question, or at least 7% of global annual turnover question, because that's the highest fine. This is the fine for non-compliance with these prohibitions in the AI Act. For most obligations, the fine is up to 15 million euros, or 3% of global annual turnover. And this is this mostly applies to all the high-risk obligations. And then lastly, should you provide any incorrect or misleading information to regulators, then this is punishable by a fine of 7.5 million euros, or 1% of global annual turnover. Now, as was said, the text is being finalized. It awaits formal adoption in an upcoming EU Parliament session, and then a final Council endorsement. Once it enters into force, then after the first 6 months of entry into force, the prohibitions will become applicable. Most of the AI Act will apply 24 months from entry into force. There are a few exceptions to this. Again, penalties will apply a bit sooner, 12 months after, and high-risk obligations related to these Annex 2 high-risk systems. These will apply from 36 months after entry into force. One thing to note that this is a regulation, so it is directly applicable. It doesn't need to be transposed into national laws, but there are a few aspects what national governments will need to do. Member states will need to, for example, implement the fines in their local legislation. So how can you be prepared? First, you should have an overview of your AI systems. It's not only what your organization is developing, but also what are you actually using? Are you using any turnkey AI solutions? Second, in the spirit of this risk-based approach, you should yourself conduct a risk assessment, understand the risks of each system, and then categorize these AI systems based on the risks. So you should understand, is your use case regulated, and then what is your role? Are you a provider or a deployer, for example? And finally, taking into account the risks, you should put in place a quality management system. So this would be a comprehensive system that should ensure compliance with the AI Act. So this would include these risk management measures that would, again, depend on the specific AI system and your role. Are you a deployer? Are you a provider? So these are the very basic but crucial steps that you can take today. This is actually all from my side. Thank you so much, and I'll hand it back to you, Mihkel.
So thank you very much, Oliver. So if just to recap, where is the let's say if someone who is listening right now knows that they're probably using some sort of AI systems, what is the let's say first place to start? Where should they start?
I think the first place to start is actually knowing what kind of AI systems you use. So, for example, is your human resources department using any kind of AI to filter job applications? That's a very, very common use case that's actually high risk under the AI. So I think the first step is actually having an overview of what's in use. And then after that, you can go into assessing the risks. So going through the risks that might arise from these use cases that you have, assess the risks and see if this is actually covered under the AI Act.
All right. Thank you very much, Oliver. Let's move on with our presentations. Next up, we have Martin Karu from Sparkle Consulting, and he will be talking about the infamous EU AI Act and discuss is it about it, is it the driver for and overall the discussion will be about ethical use of AI and innovation. So Martin, where to?
Hi Mihkel, hi everyone listening. Thanks for the presentations already, Glenn and Oliver. I have already learned quite a lot, and hopefully you as well. So I'm from Sparkle. My name is Martin. Today I'm going to talk about the technical part of this EU Data AI Act, and I will go through some of the topics are similar. I will glance over them quickly, but then still from a technical viewpoint. What are the goals? What are the roles of the organizations or operators then? How do we assess it? And this is also in prior work from other large tech companies and also EU in general. Then we are planning to make AI ethical and applying the AI Act. So here we go, EU AI Act. How we understand it is that the purpose is to create the framework that ensures safety, transparency, and accountability. So nothing new. You have to be lawful, and you should respect laws, fundamental human rights, and also user safety. This is not the first time anyone has talked about being ethical also in the AI context. So there are prior work from IBM, Google, Microsoft. Also EU has the certification pathway. So as Glenn already said, that they are compliant anyway. But this is the first horizontal framework for AI governance. This is first. It has comprehensive scope, and I will again cover that in later slides. It's a lot more detailed and refined than anything prior. There's a balance between innovation and regulation. So Of course, any new regulation will inhibit innovation somewhat, but there are positive sides here as well. Let's cover those as well. And the outcome is a single market. So if you enter Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania, then actually you have the capability to enter the whole EU. And hopefully, as the EU is a driver for global regulations, then other markets as well. Prior work from tech giants, Google has AI principles. They describe their commitment, how they're developing responsible technology. Microsoft has ethical AI. And these are their technical viewerships, their understanding of how they want to build AI and how they propose you to deploy it. Then IBM has an AI Explainability 360, and this is a really technical tool. You can assess how your data set compares to the ethical requirements or how your model acts. And this EU first draft, we've seen it in 2019, EU ethics guidelines and so forth. Also, there are other regulations such as GDPR and ESG. So these are topics in AI Act as well. You have to be respectful of copyrighted materials, and you have to be respectful of private information. And again, this isn't anything too new. Oliver covered this really nicely. There are things that you shouldn't do, which are unacceptable risk. There are high risk and limited risk, and we call it minimal risk, but it might be unregulated. There's still a code of conduct, and if you are using AI, then you should understand who you are, so you have to be compliant. Even if you're not at risk, you have to ensure that you're making all the necessary steps to be a minimal risk deployer of AI systems. Examples of systems, so the unacceptable risk, and again, we covered most of these, exploitative systems, social scoring, and we will get later on into the fun definitions of when is general purpose AI high risk, when is it limited risk. So there are different reasons why LLMs or large language models are risky. There is the integrated reasons. There might be discrimination or bias in the data set. You might be using copyrighted or IP protected data to that. There are book authors who have made such claims. If someone is able to hack the system, then they might gain access to your personal data or other sensitive code extraction. So there are different security reasons why you should not put your sensitive data there, or if somehow the model was trained on sensitive data, then there might be methods to gain access to that training data set. The use of LLMs from the negative side, of course, it is used for disinformation, for other malicious use, for scamming, fraud, and hate speech as well, so toxic content. And one of the weirder reasons why LLMs are risky is that we're relying on them way too much. So this will come back in a later slide with actually this slide. So general purpose AI. What makes the OpenAIs and Azure AI and ChatGPTs and all of those things, what makes it risky or not risky? So first thing is not actually even on this triangle or pyramid. Providers need to perform a systemic risk assessment. The bigger, the more smarter your model is, the bigger the impact, the bigger likelihood of a systemic risk. And there are, as far as I know, 2 systems that fall into this category worldwide today. So one of them is Gemini and the other one should be ChatGPT. They have systemic risk, and that's the purpose of that's the obligation of the provider to ensure that the models, the systems are secure and conform to the ethical AI requirements. And then most of us are the deployers in this conversation, most likely. So we need to review the use case. And now the bigger, the better the system is, the higher the systemic risk. But then these risk levels that you see in the pyramid, that's actually the use case. How are we applying it? So If you use ChatGPT to write a school essay, then it should fall somewhere here. There is limited risk. If you use it as an in-car AI system, then it's high risk. So most of the risk pyramid is about how you use it, what's the function of your AI, and then additionally there's the systemic risk. Here's an example from DPD. They put into place a really powerful chat engine. Most probably it's ChatGPT with a stylized front end. So customers were able to hack it and ask it to create the asked it to recommend other firms and tell over exaggerate how much you hate DPD. They wrote this to the DPD chat and the haiku about how useless DPD is and so forth. So even in this case, if you go back one slide, then there isn't a huge risk here. There's potential impact to the company's vision and marketing and such things, but there isn't human or medical risk here. So it's still limited risk if you do a chatbot with the general purpose AI. Going forward into the existing ethical AI guidelines. So soon you will see the number of expectations from EU, but Microsoft focuses on 5 different things. There's fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, and transparency and accountability. These align quite well with the EU AI Act, but they are still rather from the technical viewpoint of if you're building something, then this is how you should build it. And the EU says if you're building anything, then make it compliant. And fairness is still, you have to make sure that you're treating an individual as an individual, not as an Estonian or typical Eastern European person with low credit risk or a low credit score, if we use American terms. So you have to be fair. You have to look at a person in the context of that person, not in patterns of similar systems or similar people, objects. Google's AI principles also introduce this process. There is a product development cycle, and then you start with the pipelines, which are mainly about gaining data. How do you gather data? How do you store it? How do you transform it? How do you process it? Then there's triaging, as in defining the risk levels, and you already do a review, then you discuss on the line, you synthesize some additional data, and so forth. So at the end of the cycle, the product is deployed. And this brings in the life cycle or the arc of a product that you should actually start from the beginning in being ethical and making your solution ethical. This is a decision tree for the IBM's AI explainability thing. So the first question here is, do you want to understand data or the model? If we go with data, then samples or features. If you want to pick some samples of your data set, then there is a tool called Proto-Dash that you can apply to your data set. And it's a collaboration between Amazon and IBM, and all the edges here are tools to assess your model. So this is not about this is the technical skills, or again, technical implementation, not so much the compliance. So when we get to the outcome of an AI system, or what makes up an AI system, so these are rough numbers, and don't take these to the bank, but in the core there's technology. That's what model you're using, what actually it's where you're deploying it. Is it on the edge or is it in the cloud? Do you go with Mac or Windows? That has minimal effects, but it affects it a bit. 20% is the model and the data that you choose to train the model, and most of the outcome of a system, may it be AI or general, is still people. Because at the end of the day, people choose the processes, people implement the ethical processes guidelines, people review your products, and so forth, and people use it. So most of the compliance is still about people, even though we're talking about AI. Here's the review of the operators in the AI ecosystem. There's downstream and upstream, or there's a stream, as in think of it as a river. We start from companies, organizations who are building AI systems, and think of OpenAI in this case, ChatGPT providers. Then it's imported into the EU market. ChatGPT or OpenAI is an American company, so in order to operate in the EU market, you need to import it here, and it's like physical goods or other services. And then there are deployers. You deploy the system, you use it. There is a likelihood that you can have multiple roles, as in OpenAI is most probably the same importer, or if you're building a really custom AI system, then of course you're using it in your product, but yes, you are providing it to yourself, or team A is building the model and team B is implementing it in the core product. But yeah, there's upstream and downstream. So most of the obligations typically lie with providers, and the downstream parties then don't have so many things to prove. This is a decision tree for the EU AI Act, or EU AI. And there are many decisions here to take, and Oliver showed them also really nicely. At the end of the day, you need to check many things, and if you need to understand who you are, what you're doing, does your system have AI, and the role that you're in. So if you're a deployer, then you need to go and open Articles 28, 29, and 29A. These will apply to you. Or if you're a military use case provider, then, or deployer, then voila, you don't. You have fewer obligations. Here's an overview of what the provider, as in OpenAI, as in Google, need to prove. When they wish to bring in their product to the market, they need to define, outline what's the data, how or where are they getting the data, how are they pulling it in, how are they storing it. Data governance is question is about who manages it. Do you define it into domains? Do you have reviews of the data? Do you have data quality expectations? Then are you using copyrighted data? How have you made sure that you aren't using intellectually protected information? European Union has also ESG, as in sustainability guidelines, and again it's a similar guide that this AI Act is, but mainly focusing on energy usage. So here we go. Compute is already in here. How much energy are you using to train your model? And yes, this is more about training, not about deploying. So provider obligation. Then there are questions about models. What are the capabilities? How are you mitigating risks? How are you evaluating your models? How are you testing it? And how are you deploying it? Machine generate content questions, and which member states of EU is the model available in? And yeah, downstream documentation. So that will get us to the next part, where you as a deployer, you need to implement it as per the manual. So the providers need to provide it. Here's Stanford, the graph. They took a previous version of this AI Act, and they assessed most of the bigger providers against these. And as you can see, there are questions about data sources, data governance, copyright data, compute energy, and so forth. And most probably, all of the providers will amend any shortcomings here. And as you saw before, they have a bit of time, 24 to 36 months, if they're in the limited, or depending on what category the use case is in. And from here, what are the best performers is Bloom, and it's a 700 gigabyte model developed by the French government or French universities, and it is open source, so you can deploy it, and it's really transparent on where does it get the data, how's the data being managed, and so forth. It's not the best LLM, but it's the best or most compliant LLM. And again, somehow the compute and energy sections are they gain really low points here. So actually, yeah, copyright data is also quite bad. But again, these will change, and these are the obligations of the providers. But you should make sure that you're using tools that are compliant. So deployer obligations, again, you saw similar documentation. Number 1, follow documentation. Number 2, make sure that there's human in the loop. Number 3, there should be data and AI governance. What are you using? How are you using? Who is using? How are you ensuring access? Do you have periodic reviews of it and automatic reviews of the data quality, etc.? Then log it and monitor it. Be transparent on what you're doing and how you're doing it, and ensure the accuracy. Make sure it's robust and secure. An example I like to bring here is that if you train a medical AI system and you're trying to estimate or support the doctor in making the decision, what's the problem or what's the illness, then if you've trained it on Estonian information and you get people coming from the US, then they will have different medications, different definitions, and is your system robust enough to handle new data that it hasn't seen before? A really awesome thing, at least in my eyes, is this AI regulatory sandbox, and this is a supporting factor 100%. This will speed up go to market because, or what it is actually, it's a controlled environment. So each member state, as in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belgium, etc., you need to, the government needs to provide an environment that has relevant data set, that has methods and guides and best practices, and has experts with industry knowledge on how to bring your product to market. So this is, in my eyes, still really awesome, and it does enable simpler entry to EU markets. So if you want to be sure that your product is compliant, then here you go. Here's the method to do that. What are we doing, or what a technical partner is doing? There are AI Act readiness assessments. I will click into this next. The compliance as a service, compliance officer trainings. So each company needs to have properly trained people who know what is compliance, or are they compliant or not. And there are ethical frameworks and ethical boards, and also AI workshops. There was a definition about AI. Do all the relevant parties in companies understand what is AI and how do they need to be compliant with it? Then general compliance process looks something like this. You take stock, as in you firstly make sure that you actually have AI systems running. It might be that it's not AI. It's just if else. Then you assess the risks, and then you go into making yourself compliant. You ensure compliance, you register and run the conformity assessment, and then you monitor. Being ethical does not stop the moment that you go to market, but it's a continuous thing. And the first 2 steps, making the assessment and creating the risk, for us typically looks something like this. There's a workshop, as in knowledgeable experts with different backgrounds, or T-shaped organization comes together and assesses, gathers the data. Then there's a risk rating. We review what are you using the systems for. Then there's a maturity score and roadmap, how to be compliant. And a quick recap. 4 Ws. The focus of AI Act is being ethical and human-centric. Don't forget about the person behind the screen or behind the system. You are a human, except if there are LLMs watching this video. There are risk-based classifications of AI systems. How are you using it? Why are you using it? What's the purpose? And the goal is trustworthy and non-discriminating solutions. Companies need to comply with it because they're using it more and more, and this now provides the framework then that defines what is AI, how to be compliant, and so forth. And also a big reason why to be compliant is the fines and penalties. Ooh, pretty much if you're a provider, distributor, importer, deployer, or any third party. Oliver was a bit kinder with this, and he didn't have any third parties, but I'm guessing you should you need to be compliant. If you're not using AI systems, then you are compliant. If you're using AI systems, then define who you are and understand your obligations. And when there was a better slide from Oliver, but in essence, it should be approved Q2 this year, and then you should have 2 to 3 years to ensure that you're compliant. And once more, the penalties and fines, large numbers. For small and medium enterprises, typically the lowest amount works. And I know that for GDPR, the largest penalty in Estonia should be somewhere around 35,000 euros. But that was for one market. If your solution is in multiple markets, then you might get fined in all of those markets. So finally, we now have a new regulation. Is it limiting or accelerating? There are higher costs. Glenn wrote in the chat that they have 2 full-time employees to make sure that they are compliant. And this additional bureaucracy might lead to a longer time to market. I'm, however, leaning towards accelerating because now we understand what is AI, what's the framework. There is more trust, so investors can invest more freely because they understand what the system is, because this technical documentation is actually relevant for all parties, not just the EU regulating authorities. And I worked in enterprises, and anytime you wish to introduce a new solution to an enterprise, you need to go through the IT architecture and IT security reviews. You need to make sure that it's trustworthy and compliant and all of those things. So these are handed to you by the providers. So this will for sure speed up the implementation in enterprises. And don't worry, enterprise employees are already using GPAI, just unofficially. You log into your chat GPT account and you ask the questions and you copy paste the secure company information into ChatGPT. So proper systems deploying AI properly into your enterprise is more relevant. It's really important. And yeah, capturing a single market is pretty much the same as capturing the whole EU. And I love those regulatory sandboxes. Having the experts at hand supporting you, guiding you, awesome. And all in all, the compliance is mandatory. You have to be compliant. The lowest tier is that I don't use AI, and you are compliant, but then there are different obligations. They are shared between providers and deployers, and most of you most probably are deployers. And the GPAI or generative AI mostly is with providers. The deployer responsibilities are about the use case. Use it ethically. My name is Martin, and if you want to read about the Mund AI, then or if you want to see AI insights, then on Mondays we have Mund AI.
All right, thank you, Martin. A few questions for you. Some of it I will leave to the Q&A session, but 2 questions I will ask right away. When your clients approach you, what is this strongest pain point they have? What is it that is like what's the most important or most topical item they need your help with?
So in essence, it's getting started. Where to even start with all of this, because there is a ton of information available. Anyone can go in and review it, but then understanding what are your obligations and how to do the risk assessment. So those initial workshops at the strategic corporate level, enterprise level, those are really valuable, because after that, the typical a company typically has smart, knowledgeable people who know what to do, but then giving them the guide and the direction, that's really good.
Okay, and we had one question about the sandboxes, the regulatory sandboxes that you mentioned. That can you elaborate on this a little bit more? What's the role of the regulatory sandbox, and are you aware if our governments are already working on these environments?
It's not that defined yet, and even on the slide, I think it said 24 months after the EUA Act has been taken into law or approved. Then the governments have 24 months to implement those sandboxes. How I envision it, and I hope to build those, is that there is a review, or compliance is still a review of your system in the actual environment. So this should be an entryway from your laptop and your lab environment into the real world. So a stepping stone where you can test your systems against the actual situations. So I'm really hoping for knowledgeable experts who have deployed AI systems and compliant AI systems, people with industry knowledge like medical, and we had those high-risk topics: vehicles, medical, banking, military use. So having a list of people who have the experience and can tell you how to adjust your system, how to make it compliant, and then also the governance part. What do you need to do with your data? How do you need to manage your data, and who do you need to have? So it's I'm hoping they're like startup accelerators or incubators, and if it's a mandated thing, then governments will provide it with funding, and funding typically brings in people. So,
all right, thank you. So let's move on to the Q&A session, and I'll first start by directing some questions individually, because during the entire webinar we have been receiving some questions that we haven't published with answers that seem to be directed to certain presenters. So Glenn, I'm going to start with you, and there was a question that came during your webinar that I didn't manage to ask earlier, is that apparently one of the requirements of high-risk AI systems in the AI, for the high-risk AI systems in the AI Act is to do post-monitoring. So how is it that you are tackling this already, or intend to do that?
Yeah, so company-wide, we have a deviation management system in place, is what we call it. And basically, when anything deviates from what we consider normal or expected behavior from the product, deviation is initiated. Examples are, for example, the app is crashing at a certain moment, or we notice, for example, specifically for the AI system, but it goes broader than that. But specifically for the AI system, it can be that we notice a performance decrease in a certain age group. Then a deviation is initiated. Some investigators are assigned. For example, can be a data scientist. And then basically they investigate what the problem is and what the solution might be. And then we propose that to the compliance team, and then usually a deadline is set by which the solution needs to be implemented. And yeah, then we solve the problem by a certain date. And of course, during audits, that can all be accessed. Yeah, so it's fully transparent. So basically, a system is in place to handle those deviations, not only specific for AI, but also broader for the product. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Next question we have to Oliver, and there was a question that can you bring an example of a high-risk AI system that is or AI application in education that is regulated then by Annex 3, as you covered in your presentation, Oliver?
Yeah, surely. So not all applications that are used in education are high risk. So the AI Act brings a few specific subcategories, in which case the AI Act considers these high risk These are, for example, when determining access to education. For example, think of university application tests and so on. Then there's also evaluating learning outcomes. So basically grading the tests. This would be considered high risk. And then what's also high risk is monitoring, for example, students during the test for any prohibited behavior. So these all are examples of what would actually be considered high risk in education. So again, when it concerns, for example, the person's access or the grades, then usually this is considered high risk.
Okay, thank you. And Martin, one question to you as well. So a question was put forward, which goes like this: that how to look at Gen AI-based apps? Do they fall under EU AI Act, and if so, in which category? Or is that to be looked at case-by-case basis, depending on the risk? So, meaning, as I understand, it's if someone has built their application on top of Gen AI.
Thanks for the question. I think I covered it slightly. Then just to recap, it's the first thing is, as Oliver said, they're unregulated, or they were so new that the original text did not have them. In essence, GPAI is a method, it's a tool, and it does not fall under any of the use case risk classifications automatically. But rather it's a capability. You can do so many things with it. There was the systemic risk part. So if you have an epic GPAI, which can do so many things, then you have a systemic risk. And in that case, you need to present even more documentation and ensure even more precisely that you're compliant, or how do you ensure compliance. But then if you don't have an epic system, but you have a really good the LLM or system, then you're not that systemically risky. So you have fewer things to do. And that's the provider obligations. Second part was how do you use it? If Fibricheck uses GPAI in their assessment, then maybe writing the you give the EKG and it gives you a text output, then that's high risk because it's medical. But if I write school essays, then it's not high risk. But I have to be transparent. So it's the limited risk part.
All right, thanks. So I guess the next questions I have, Oliver, Martin, Glenn, feel free to respond, chip in, however you feel comfortable. But that was I would like to start with kind of a thought and a question. So thought is by analogy. When we first heard about the GDPR, then the GDPR was enacted, and then it came into force. Then there was a 2-year sunrise period, and then all of a sudden it was applicable. So given that we've seen the timeline here, it sounds like deja vu or all over again. And that's from practical point of view, we saw that a lot of market participants actually woke up quite in the very late stages. So just your thoughts, like what kind of let's say market participants should start moving now, who are really in a rush right now?
The high risk ones, especially. So maybe Oliver, you had a really good slide about that.
Yeah, perhaps of course the high risk ones, but maybe the organizations that will find that they're high risk will usually be the ones that are in the first case processing a lot of data, but in other cases perhaps processing data that is relevant to critical infrastructure, but also for public services and credit institutions. So think of banks, insurance providers, and so on.
All right, thanks. Now one question that was raised was about prohibited AI, and in particular relating to social scoring. So the question is that what exactly is the definition of social scoring, and the person who presented the question to them, it seemed that the purpose of this limitation might have a negative impact in mitigating cybercrime related risks, for example. So any comments?
Yeah, I can maybe a bit expand on the definition of social scoring. So social scoring altogether is not totally prohibited, but the definition is actually restricted under the AI Act. So there's a lot of good that can come out of social scoring, but as we see from other examples outside of Europe, there's also quite a bit of bad that can come with it. So now, maybe the important thing to note with the definition under the AI Act is that it can apply in two circumstances, and there must always be an unfavorable treatment that is the outcome. So favorable treatment from social scoring, this would be actually allowed. And then additionally, this is not the only restriction that kind of defines the scope of social scoring, but this unfavorable treatment can occur either in unrelated context to the data that was analyzed. For example, think of assessing a person's eligibility for public benefits. So what kind of data should you be able to analyze based on that? For example, I think it would be out of context if you evaluate a person's behavior on social media. So this is an unrelated context when you're actually assessing, for example, a person's need for some kind of benefit. And then the second option is when this unfavorable outcome is disproportionate to the actual behavior that was analyzed. So I would say it depends again on the specific use case in a cybersecurity situation, but when the outcome is good and when the outcome is not specifically discriminatory, then it should fall outside the scope actually. So at least there's in some ways the good versions of social scoring would still be allowed.
Glenn, Martin, do you want to expand?
It's tough to continue after the really good answer. Pretty much, I have a joke, or jokingly, anything that China does is unprohibited or unacceptable. The social scoring there are really awful examples from there, such as arresting people because the AI system thinks that they might commit a crime. Yeah, logically unacceptable.
Okay, well, let's move on. I see from some of the questions that we received actually already in advance of the webinar, but also during the webinar, is this perhaps distinction still between the provider and deployer. And there was a question actually, and then we can perhaps discuss about this openly. Is let's imagine that someone is running a hospital. They are a healthcare institution, and they are actually in this entire hospital. They are deploying a lot of technology which likely has AI components or which are regulated medical devices. So how will it actually impact? I don't know. A regular hospital, for example, AI Act in particular. So maybe Glenn and Martin, you want to cover this?
Yeah, so looking from Fibricheck's perspective, so we are a provider in the case of the European AI Act. So we provide the product to the hospital, and so I think we are end responsible when the hospital uses our product as is, and in the way we set it up and in the way we provide the app, basically. Maybe there are some edge cases. The example Martin already gave, for example, when the hospital is using ChatGPT, then it's another story. But when they're using specific medical devices, then the medical device manufacturer is basically the provider of the artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and in those cases when there's a actual medical device that has gone through all of the obligatory testing and the processes, then you are the deployer, and you still have to firstly make sure that you open up the manual and you're using it as per defined. You need to be sure to use it properly, have a person there, and to me there seems to be an opt-out button at some point. And in the case of this hospital example, let's say that this machine is now malfunctioning. So the medical specialist should have an option to do it without the AI system. So in the case of procurement, when you're buying the device, then you should look into those questions as well. What happens if the system is not robust enough to respond to changes or new medication or misunderstanding the medication names? So at the end of the day, you need to be in control. There should be a human in the process.
This human oversight or human in the process is actually quite a relevant topic. Perhaps we can touch upon that a little bit as well. Again, maybe from a more technical side, is if we were to assume that AI systems are becoming more and more complex over time, how is it possible to tackle this issue of being really transparent, maintaining explicability, and even ability for a human to provide this oversight? What are your thoughts?
I can answer. So this is another step in the process. So things have been going more simpler and simpler. So the abstraction layer always rises. We started off with initially you did calculations on a board. Then calculations were into Notepad. Then the first computers came. Some people already forgot about how to do it manually, calculations. Then even better computers came and even better search, and now finding the information and finding relevant information and in the context that you need it, in the tone of voice that you understand it, and in the terminology. It's so easy that it will happen again, that people will forget how to do it manually. So this human in the loop, or there are risks that are involved with introducing more abstract or more automated systems. You forget how to do it manually, but then that's up to the organization to ensure that they still have relevant documentation or understanding on how to do it manually, and they can opt into that process if needed.
All right. Maybe a question to Oliver as representing the legal side here. Where does this AI Act actually fit in, as we have so many other regulations? So is the AI Act a solution to everything? If I'm compliant with AI Act, I'm cool, or how should we look at that?
Unfortunately, the AI Act itself is not the solution to everything. But what's important to understand is that it's a horizontal legal act. So it means it applies to all sectors, regardless of if you're working in tech, in pharmaceuticals, and so on. So it applies to every sector. So almost every company that uses AI will need to comply. But what will make it easier, especially when it comes to these high-risk cases that are already regulated under EU law, is that they're usually quite well equipped to comply with these requirements, because they're actually already prepared. They already went through these conformity assessments if they need to, and they already have these burdensome requirements. So in that sense, for them, it will not be that big of a leap forward. But overall, yes, almost all companies will need to in some case take into account the AI Act.
Yes, and if I may add, then not neglect any other laws that they're still subject to, such as the GDPR or IP-related legal acts, also cybersecurity-related legal acts, and also was mentioned actually contractual law, especially in terms of I think Martin brought this out, that it's very important now to start following the user manuals and licenses that come with the AI products that are supplied to deployers or users. So yeah, so it's it's an interesting time that we are living in. So much regulation coming up. I was wondering if any of our speakers have any final thoughts they would like to share, or we start wrapping this session up.
So going forward, we recommend doing the assessments, understand what are your obligations, understand when you have to be compliant, and what does compliance mean to you. So I hope you've seen the faces, and I hope the message was clear enough. As I read, we will share the slides as well, so you will see the context and the context.
Oliver, Glenn, anything? No.
No, thank you for the interesting presentations, both Martin and Oliver. And thank you for the invitation. It's nice, interesting.
Yeah. Thank you for everyone attending, and thank you for the interesting presentations from the others as well.
All right, and with this, we can actually conclude our webinar for today. Thanks to all the attendees that we had today. I hope that you took away with you something useful that you can put into practice, but please do feel free to reach out to the experts. Yeah, the presentations and then the recording will follow shortly in a few days' time. So thank you, and then see you next time in our upcoming events. Bye-bye.